Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: journalists killed in line of duty declines despite Gaza death toll. The EU struggles to unify around a Gaza ceasefire call, but work on peace moves continues. War is stupid and I want it to end, injured Palestinian children speak. Red Sea ships hit by drone and missiles fired from Yemen. A cargo ship in the Red Sea has been hit and set ablaze by a projectile launched from Yemen. Journalists killed in line of duty declines despite Gaza death toll. RFI. According to a report by Reporters Without Borders, RSF, the number of journalists killed while carrying out their work in 2023 has dropped to its lowest level since 2002. In the first 11 months of the year, 45 journalists were killed, compared to 61 in 2022. The decline is attributed to efforts by intergovernmental organizations and NGOs to combat impunity, as well as increased caution by reporters themselves. However, RSF notes that Mexico remains dangerous for journalists, with continued kidnappings and attacks. The report also highlights the high number of journalists detained globally, with China, Myanmar, and Belarus identified as the countries with the most imprisoned journalists. The EU struggles to unify around a Gaza ceasefire call, but work on peace moves continues. Associated Press. Leaders from the European Union, EU, are calling for a united stance on a ceasefire in Gaza. Belgium, Austria, Germany, Spain and Ireland have all expressed their concern about the civilian death toll in the region. The EU is the largest aid provider to Palestinians, and has tried to use its diplomatic position to encourage peace between Israel and Palestine. The EU is said to have struggled to walk a tightrope between condemning Hamas attacks, supporting Israel's right to defend itself, and ensuring that the rights of civilians on both sides are protected under international law. War is stupid and I want it to end, injured Palestinian children speak. Al Jazeera. According to a report by the Euromed Human Rights Monitor, over 10,000 Palestinian children have been killed or are missing under rubble and presumed dead since October 7. At least 24,000 children have lost one or both parents in Israeli attacks and about 18,000 have been injured, with some in critical condition. The majority of Gaza's 2.3 million people are aged under 18 and have lived through multiple Israeli offensives. Due to the blockade, children are also facing the prospect of starvation, as well as outbreaks of infectious diseases due to overcrowding and lack of sanitation in UN-run schools. Red Sea ships hit by drone and missiles fired from Yemen. BBC. 2 cargo ships in the Red Sea have been attacked by missiles fired from Yemen, the US says. One was hit with a drone and another by missiles, both launched from a part of Yemen controlled by the Houthis, a rebel movement backed by Iran. They came under attack in the Bab el-Mandab, a narrow strait of water that is vital for global trade. The Houthis, who seized power 9 years ago, have declared their support for Hamas and say they are targeting ships traveling to Israel. A cargo ship in the Red Sea has been hit and set ablaze by a projectile launched from Yemen. Associated Press. A Liberian-flagged cargo ship, the Al Jisra, caught fire in the Red Sea on Friday after being hit by a projectile launched from rebel-controlled Yemen. A U.S. defense official and a private intelligence firm have both confirmed the attack, although the Houthis have not yet claimed responsibility. Shipping in the area has been increasingly targeted as the Israel-Hamas war threatens to become a wider regional conflict. As Israel weighs how to honor October 7 victims, festival exhibit serves as hallowed space. New York Times. An installation at Tel Aviv's exhibition grounds has recreated some of the essence of the Tribe of Nova Trance festival that was dedicated to peace and love but was shut down by barrages of rocket fire from Gaza. The festival was ambushed and at least 360 festival-goers were killed. The exhibit, which opened to the public for 2 weeks on December 7, is titled Nova 6.29 for the moment, that morning around sunrise, when the music stopped, and is a vast memorial for the nearly 400 who were killed. A doctor went to Gaza to help. What he saw there still haunts him. Washington Post. Ghassan Abu Sitta, a British Palestinian doctor, spent 43 days tending to the wounded in Gaza City before he left, exhausted and carrying a feeling of guilt that he could have done more. A reconstructive plastic surgeon in London, he arrived to volunteer with Doctors Without Borders in Gaza on October 9, in the window after the Hamas assault on Israel and before the Israeli invasion. As Israeli airstrikes were hitting Gaza City, hundreds of wounded were being brought to Al-Ali and Al-Shifa hospitals, where Abu Sitta worked round the clock. The bombing seemed to come closer and closer. Everything that I had done in my life had led me to this point, and this is where I was meant to be, Abu Sitta said. There were several evenings that I went to sleep thinking it was going to be the end of us. Denmark stepping up terror probe amid suspicion of Hamas links. Al Jazeera. Denmark is investigating a potential link to Hamas in Europe following the arrests of 2 suspects. The Danish Security and Intelligence Service has detained 3 people in total on suspicion of plotting an act of terror. While 1 suspect was released after a custody hearing, the whereabouts of 4 others remains unknown. The arrests coincide with detentions in Germany and the Netherlands, with strong suggestions that they are connected. Israel's Mossad spy agency has said Denmark exposed Hamas infrastructure on European soil, while the country's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen condemned attempts to bring conflict into Danish society. Denmark has increased police presence, particularly in Copenhagen and Jewish areas. German prosecutors have linked the arrests to a plot to attack Jewish institutions in Europe. The European Union's Home Affairs Commissioner has warned of a risk of terrorist attacks during the Israel-Hamas war. Israel continues Gaza onslaught despite U.S. envoy's new phase of war. Al Jazeera. Despite claims from a U.S. official that Israel would be moving towards precision targeting rather than widespread bombing and ground operations in Gaza, Israel has continued to pound the region with airstrikes. The U.S. envoy did not provide a timeline for when the shift would happen, but did indicate that the war would continue for months. The U.S. is also working to release Israeli captives held in Gaza and has suggested that the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority could play a role in governing Gaza after the war. The UK and other countries have called on Israel to tackle settler violence in the West Bank. Private gun ownership in Israel spikes after Hamas attacks. New York Times. There has been a significant increase in firearms license applications in Israel following the recent attacks by Hamas. Israelis are feeling a sense of insecurity and are seeking to protect themselves by owning firearms. Before the attacks, private gun ownership in Israel was not as prevalent as in the United States, but the number of gun licenses issued has increased dramatically in recent weeks. The new regulations for gun ownership in Israel were not a result of the attacks but were already being planned earlier this year. Critics of the expansion of gun ownership in Israel argue that it will lead to an increase in violence, including homicides, suicides, domestic violence, and private gangs operating as militias. They fear that the proliferation of weapons will have serious consequences for society. However, many Israelis feel that they cannot rely on the state to protect them and believe that owning a firearm is necessary for their personal safety. There are concerns that the increased availability of guns may lead to more violence and unrest, both within Israel and in the occupied territories. Hello, viewers. It's your friendly neighborhood 6 Doctor here, bringing you the latest news from the 6th dimension. Let's dive right in. First up, we have some good news. According to a report by Reporters Without Borders, the number of journalists killed while doing their job has dropped to its lowest level since 2002. This decline is attributed to efforts by organizations and NGOs to combat impunity, as well as increased caution by reporters themselves. However, Mexico still remains dangerous for journalists, with continued kidnappings and attacks. Next, we turn to the European Union's struggle to unify around a ceasefire call in Gaza. While some member states have expressed their concern about the civilian death toll and called for a united stance, the EU has found it challenging to strike a balance between condemning attacks, supporting Israel's right to defend itself, and ensuring the protection of civilians on both sides. Moving on, Al Jazeera brings us heart-wrenching stories from injured Palestinian children who have been affected by the ongoing conflict. Thousands of children have been killed, injured, or lost their parents in Israeli attacks, and they now face the prospect of starvation and infectious diseases due to the blockade and lack of sanitation in UN-run schools. In another development, 2 cargo ships in the Red Sea have been attacked by drones and missiles fired from Yemen. The Houthis, a rebel movement backed by Iran, have claimed responsibility for these attacks. This raises concerns about the potential escalation of the Israel-Hamas conflict into a wider regional conflict. Shifting our focus to Israel, we learn from the New York Times that an installation in Tel Aviv is serving as a memorial for the victims of the Tribe of Nova Trance festival that was tragically shut down by rocket fire from Gaza. The exhibit, titled Nova 6.29, pays tribute to the nearly 400 festival-goers who lost their lives. In a deeply personal account, a British Palestinian doctor shares his experience of working in Gaza City during the conflict. Ghassan Abu Sidah spent 43 days tending to the wounded and carries a feeling of guilt that he could have done more. His story highlights the immense human toll of the conflict. Denmark is stepping up its terror probe amid suspicions of Hamas links. Several arrests have been made, and there are suggestions of connections to other arrests in Germany and the Netherlands. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has condemned attempts to bring the conflict into Danish society, and heightened security measures have been implemented. Despite claims of a new phase of war by a U.S. envoy, Israel has continued its onslaught in Gaza. The war is expected to continue for months, and the U.S. is working to release Israeli captives held in Gaza. The UK and other countries have called on Israel to address settler violence in the West Bank. Lastly, we have an interesting development in Israel. The recent attacks by Hamas have led to a spike in private gun ownership in the country. Many Israelis feel a sense of insecurity and believe that owning a firearm is necessary for their personal safety. However, critics worry that this increase in gun availability may lead to more violence and unrest. And there you have it, folks. That's the latest news from around the world. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these stories? Do you have any questions? Let's start a discussion. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.